The popular mobile industry trade show called the Mobile World Congress is held every year in different countries. The 2009 version of this event was held in Barcelona, Spain. LG and Microsoft used that as an opportunity to sign an agreement for LG to use Microsoft Windows Mobile on LG phones. LG wanted to use Microsoft Mobile OS as its platform for some 50 types of smartphones by 2012. LG was led by Yong Nam as its CEO at the time, and Microsoft was led by Steve Ballmer as its CEO. This partnership between LG and Microsoft left industry experts puzzled. Both CEOs told reporters that this partnership will be an epic one, with LG's powerful hardware technology paired with Microsoft's incredible software prowess that will give users an amazing experience. Microsoft was excited about this partnership. The market was rapidly shifting from PCs to mobile phones, and Microsoft was struggling in the mobile market, having lost it all to Google and Apple. So it was a surprise that LG, the third largest mobile phone maker at the time, chose to form an alliance with Microsoft instead of Google. LG's decision to partner with Microsoft was one of the company's biggest mistakes that will come back to haunt them later in the years. Windows OS was a hastily cooked up mobile OS to compete with Google's Android and Apple's iOS. Microsoft had in a hurry scaled down Windows for PCs to run on mobile phones, and the result was a complete disaster. No special thought or research and development was put into building this OS as compared with Android or iOS that were built from scratch for mobile phones exclusively. If Microsoft had come up with a brand new OS platform for mobile phones, they could have had a chance. It could have been different. Windows Mobile didn't have an app store compared to Google and Apple. LG Electronics Mobile Communications Company CEO and President Scott Ahn, who was also in Barcelona when LG and Microsoft signed the partnership agreement, said the key trend in handsets for 2009 was the user interface. The user interface is focused more on how one uses a phone rather than on what to use. LG's Arena phone, for example, used touchscreens to show function buttons in 3D. LG's 2009 business strategy focused on making a more consumer-friendly user interface, stating that it would push for a convenient UI as its key strategy meant aggressive marketing efforts. But the problem with this strategy was that the mobile phone market was moving away from how to use a mobile phone to what to use in a mobile phone. With the rise of Google's Android and Apple iOS, this became more evident, but LG refused to acknowledge this change. Meanwhile, strong rivals like Motorola that LG had previously displaced to become the third largest phone maker in the world were planning a comeback. They decided to collaborate with Google instead of Microsoft, seeing how Google had displaced Microsoft to become a giant in mobile software technology. Meanwhile, LG still focused on a more user-friendly interface and more aggressive marketing. And that's not to mention that it was planning to wait 3 years to launch smartphones as late as 2012. LG's strategy paid off in 2009. It set a sales goal of 100 million units, and it met that target, increasing its market share by 10.4%. LG's success before now was heavily dependent on design. In 2005, LG collaborated with luxury designer brand Prada, and they launched the Prada phone. It was a smash hit, and soon every company wanted to do the same. In order not to be left out, Samsung joined forces with Giorgio Armani, and they launched the Giorgio Armani phone to compete with the Prada phone. When Apple aggressively introduced the iPhone into Korea in the second half of 2009, the market instantly changed from one of usability competition to a smartphone contest. This was the point LG miscalculated everything. Again, LG failed to see the pace of change. Upper management refused to even be briefed on smartphones. After all, the company had achieved its target for that year. Now, underneath all this success, trouble was brewing underground for LG. By the third quarter of 2009, sales and revenue margins began the downward spiral. Yet, LG didn't declare a crisis as they had done in late 2008. Upper management didn't want to make the company look bad, so they decided to manage the problem internally. By the first half of 2010, smartphones had dominated the global market faster than experts had anticipated. Taiwan's HTC collaborated with Google, launched its smartphone and gained market share. Motorola, also in collaboration with Google, launched its own smartphone and recorded considerable success. Google had scrapped its ambition to go into mobile hardware and focus solely on software. Google became an ally to other handset manufacturers in their fight against Apple and its closed iOS ecosystem. Yet, LG remained unwilling to collaborate with Google. Instead, it was obsessed with its deal with Microsoft. Microsoft was having its own internal problems. Its plan to launch a replacement for Windows Mobile kept being postponed. As Microsoft failed to come up with an effective solution, LG ended up the loser. Like LG, Samsung had initially missed the smartphone opportunity. However, Samsung made sure not to miss the next step. The first half of 2010 fully demonstrated Samsung's ability to catch up with the market leader. Samsung had an advantage in hardware like LG. No matter how much Apple pushed its App Store, it could not afford to completely ignore the hardware side of things. Samsung, as a leading hardware company, maintained its advantage and began to augment its shortcomings in increments. It first launched the Omnia series and then quickly followed up with better smartphones. This strategy paid off. Samsung was attempting to do everything it could to keep up with rivals before the gap became insurmountable. LG was fully exposed to its weakness in the first half of 2010. They still had the opportunity to launch a smartphone that could have competed with the Samsung's Galaxy S. Company employees even complained that upper management could not admit that it had misread the market and had lost ground on smartphones, and that launching a smartphone at the moment would be an admission of this failure, and so they continued to drag their feet. Because mobile executives enjoy very high status within the LG Group umbrella, those who called the shots in the handset business were always well placed for career advancements. This made the management reluctant to admit any failure on their watch. Moreover, a strong owner leadership style did not exist in LG at the time, with CEO Yongnam being a typical management-oriented professional. Devising the 2009 business plan with a focus on performance and marketing, likewise, was a demonstration of his leadership style. His office was filled with ideas to save expenses and eliminate waste, customer insights, and ways to achieve more effective performance. He even included guidelines on how to converse efficiently by phone and how to save time commuting. But there was nothing on creative management or the next big idea. LG finally gave up and collaborated with Google. It took more than 6 months for LG to come up with the Optimus Q. Its platform was the Android OS. Yet, Optimus Q still lagged behind Samsung's Galaxy S and HTC's Incredible. In spite of using the same chipset, competitors used the Android OS 2.1 version, while the Optimus Q was the only one using the 1.6 version. LG intended to provide free upgrades later on. Even though the Android 1.6 gives sufficient performance for a smartphone, the market had already switched to 2.1. Once consumers felt the phone was less innovative, the smartphone had little chance of survival regardless of how well it was made. LG once again was behind the curve. Its lack of speed in responding to changes in the market held LG back throughout the first half of 2010. When quality had been the deciding point, such as in design or usability, LG's decision-making structure had been successful. Yet, when the market started to be driven by speed, LG began to falter. That has been the most remarkable difference between LG and Samsung. LG always seemed to chase from behind. It responds only after the trend changed. Google had dropped its plans for the Nexus 1 and focused solely on its software when it realized that it failed to meet the high expectation of the industry and devised an OS that could compete with Apple. Hardware companies that were battling Apple all gathered around Google's Android banner. Yet, for some reason, LG still saw the market as Apple versus Microsoft. As the handset market realigned itself as a duel between Apple and Google, companies with outstanding hardware like LG and Samsung actually found themselves at more of an advantage. If the software were Google, the market would involve competition for hardware. LG read this situation again incorrectly. Samsung recognized the changes in the market early on, and it had the necessary resources to instantly vault into the leading position as the most important handset manufacturer in the Google camp. Meanwhile, back in Korea, Apple had formed an alliance with Korean telecoms to offer its phones to the telecom subscribers. Korea Telecom started adding Wi-Fi hotspots around the city for iPhone users, and this strategy saw a surge in iPhone sales and demands. Samsung, on the other hand, had collaborated with SK Telecoms to offer its Galaxy lineup of phones to SK subscribers with all sorts of juicy offers. Again, LG was left dangling. With each quarter of 2010 came reports of losses. LG's market share sank to under 20%. The company posted a $190 million loss in the third quarter of 2010. Yongnam was eventually fired as CEO of LG. He was replaced by Koo Bun-jun, a grandson of LG's founding family. Many expected things to change, but nothing really changed. LG kept making one wrong decision after another, both in designs and in smartphone offerings. For instance, in 2013, LG released the LG G Flex, which used flexible display technology to create a phone that was curved like a banana for no reason at all. Developers didn't know what to do with the curved display because there was nothing to do with it. When Samsung released the Galaxy S6 that had a curved display in 2014, the curves could be used to display notifications around the edges, or if you receive a phone call, text message, or any sort of notifications while the phone is face down on the table, the curved display will emit RGB colors to indicate that you have a notification. So developers use this curved display to their advantage. But in the case of the LG G Flex, LG couldn't justify why a person should be going around with a banana-shaped phone for no reason. LG repeated this mistake in 2015 with the LG G Flex 2 again. And by this time, the smartphone market had become super saturated with rising stars from China like Xiaomi, OnePlus, Oppo, and many others. LG's major troubles started in 2015 with the release of its flagship G series. The LG G4 was a powerful device on paper, but the G4 had a very poor build quality. The memory chips were poorly soldered to the main board of the device. This resulted in a lot of bootloop issues, causing a lot of customers to flood the LG warranty centers for replacements. But unfortunately, even the replacements suffered from the same problems. And for those that started encountering the bootloop issues when their warranties was no longer active, they had to go buy new devices. There was a total breakdown in trust, and most customers vowed never to buy an LG phone again. Trying to shake things up with the following G5 in 2016, LG decided to bet on modularity. The device allowed for different attachments to be connected at the bottom of the phone, giving it additional functionality. While that sounds cool on paper, LG's implementation of the idea was poor, turning it into more of a weakness of the phone than a strength. The interchangeable modules were limited in number and usefulness and proved unpopular with consumers because these were not features that an ordinary user found useful in everyday use. On top of that, the bootloop issues were still present in the G5 as well. The G5's successor was the G6, which wasn't a hit either. When other devices from other brands were flexing the next-gen Snapdragon 835 chipset, the G6 was launched with older Snapdragon 821 chipset. And in a market as competitive as the one today, that is such a big turn-off for consumers. Along with the G series of smartphones, LG began releasing high-end handsets under the V series lineup. The V line was built around the need of power users and gave LG the opportunity to experiment. The first two devices, which were the V10 and V20, were most notable for their small secondary screen on top for quick access to apps. The V10 and V20 were well received by those they catered to, but that wasn't a large portion of the consumer base. The devices were big compared to their competitors and not as good looking either. The ability to replace the battery was a compromise with the device's durability as they lack water resistant, which is a big deal in the smartphone market of today. At the end of the day, the V series was not that much of a different from the G series. When LG wasn't putting out ridiculous phone designs, the company's more normal phones could never answer the question of why would I buy this instead of a Samsung or an iPhone. LG and Samsung both pumped out very heavily skinned Android phones with the latest specs. But if the phones were both nearly identical, there was no reason not to buy the Samsung phone, which had more sales and marketing muscles behind it. LG's biggest contribution to the market, if you want to be really generous, were in making one of the first 1440p smartphones, that was the LG G3, and the first phone with an extra wide angle camera, that was the LG G5. Both demonstrate LG's typical inability to come up with a killer feature. Neither feature was a solid enough reason to buy an LG phone over a Samsung or an iPhone. At some point, it felt like LG lacked direction and good leadership. They will abandon every new feature they come up with from a previous device and come up with something totally new in the next device. In the world of smartphone, this is not how things work. For instance, the G5 came with modules that the user could attach to the device to give it additional functionality. When this particular modularity feature was not well accepted by end users, instead of LG to use their feedback to work on improving this feature in the G6, the whole idea was abandoned altogether. When Samsung released the Galaxy Note with a stylus for the first time, the stylus was poor in performance. Samsung released other generation of the Galaxy Note series that improved on the stylus over the years. Today, it is one of the defining features of the Galaxy Note series. LG phones, on the other hand, had no unique feature that was synonymous with LG mobile phones. The phones were released year after year with no specific direction. LG spent little on marketing and advertising as a whole. Think about it. When last did you see or hear an LG advert, unlike Samsung or Apple? Even if your LG phone didn't die an early death, there was always something about the LG brand that got to the customer's nerves. If you were not angry about bootloop issues, you were probably mad at the company for its atrocious Android update support, which often resulted in a 9-month wait for updates. The company even once claimed to launch the LG Software Update Center to try to fix its awful Android updates, which resulted in absolutely no changes and quickly became the butt of community jokes. LG joins BlackBerry, Nokia, Motorola, Essential, Facebook, Amazon, Mozilla, Microsoft, Acer, Palm, Panasonic, Toshiba, HP, Leico, Nextbit, Dell, Gigabyte, Ericsson, and many others in the pile of companies that couldn't cut it in the smartphone market.